A mystery that has never fully been explored in any timeline in the history of Mortal Kombat is the world of the Great Kung Lao, Earthrealm's original champion. There was hope that MK1 would reboot Mortal Kombat at its true beginning, but we didn't get that. Honestly, I think it would prove more challenging than most realize, but not impossible. So let's explore what can be done to truly reboot Mortal Kombat to the core when they inevitably restart the timeline for a third time. Okay, as MK players, we have seen the events of the all-important 10th tournament that decided whether Outworld would claim Earthrealm or not. What would be interesting is if we could look at the tournament before Outworld won its first, the last Earthrealm tournament that was won by Kung Lao. Also, for the purposes of this video, if I say the name Kung Lao, assume that I'm talking about the Great Kung Lao unless otherwise stated, because I'm not saying his full name every time. It's fascinating because there are so many aspects of Mortal Kombat lore that have never been seen or explained, if you can actually believe that. The potential of seeing and playing with a katana that isn't quite 10,000 years old yet, maybe playing with the great-grandfather of Kuai Liang and Bi-Han, seeing Raiden, well, Raiden would be the same, but you get the picture. The roster would be unlike anything we've ever seen in MK, and it would give an excuse to introduce new characters without them having significant consequences on the story. Our minds can kind of wonder at what happens in the aftermath of such a time period because it's so far in the past before the 1992 Mortal Kombat game, or MK1 if that's where you want to go back to next. But there is a major drawback that I must address first. It's kind of the biggest issue with doing a game from this era and probably why it's never been attempted. The roster of such a Mortal Kombat game would absolutely anger a good chunk of Mortal Kombat players out there. There would be no Sonya, there would be no Kano, there would be no Johnny Cage, no Liu Kang, no Jax, no Kenshi. So many of the fan favorites and legacy characters would have to be absent from the game. There are going to be those who, no matter what NetherRealm did, would absolutely hate this idea. It's a hell of a risk to go back multiple centuries, possibly even millenniums, back into the timeline. But this doesn't have to be a bad thing that so many legacy characters are missing. In fact, there is a very creative way to use MK's past in such a way that could lay the foundation for this game's roster and replace said characters seamlessly. As of this recording in the summer of 2026, there are two official sources of reference for Kung Lao's time period in Mortal Kombat that could be used to build a reboot out of. The first are the games themselves, which, as I stated before, doesn't really give much information about the era outside of the fact that Kung Lao dies in the first of 9 consecutive Outworld wins in Mortal Kombat. The second is the most important in my opinion. Not sure how many people are a fan of this, but it is all we have. The late 90s TV show Mortal Kombat Conquest. If you're new to my channel, you should know that I absolutely love this show. Did as a kid, still do now. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, the special effects are bad and the acting is kind of mid at times, but the depth of exploration into Mortal Kombat's origins, I'm amazed that after almost 30 years that so few aspects of this show have ever seen the light of day in the video games. To this day, while it isn't canon, it's the only full look into the history of the Great Kung Lao in Mortal Kombat, starting with his victory over Shang Tsung. Speaking of which, let's explore who makes the roster and why, because this is really important. Kung Lao, Lord Raiden, and Shang Tsung are an absolute must. Though you could replace Raiden with Liu Kang, depending upon who you want your Earthrealm protector to be. Basically, are we exploring some new era of Mortal Kombat again, or are we actually going back to traditional MK? If I have my choice, nothing against the new era, but I support the latter and not the former. I'm going with Raiden. Other characters that could loosely return, and return in quotations here, are Katana, Mileena, Sub-Zero, Quan Chi, and possibly Goro, who might honestly even serve as a final boss and not a sub-boss because of the plot and his historical importance. Remember, the key here is to seamlessly connect the games to the show. Also, addressing the elephant in the room with Sub-Zero, He doesn't need to be Kuai Liang and Bi-Han as I've stated before, because there's game precedent that ancestors and their family held the mantle of Sub-Zero before them. We'll kinda address this later on with another character, but in any event. As far as original characters from the show are concerned, Taja and Zero off top would have to be in the game, as they were Kung Lao's comrades in the show itself. Seeing a moveset that would fit a gypsy thief like Taja is kind of intriguing to me. Also, I've done videos on how Vorpax and Omichas could both be playable, so I won't go into those two, but assume they would make the roster as well. That's about 12 people so far. Other characters include a Black Dragon original, Jola. Whether or not she's her criminal self or her with the dragon abilities that she possessed is its own conversation. I actually like Dragon Jola better. Master Cho would be a fascinating addition in this world. For those who have no idea who I'm talking about right now, he was an Earthrealm sorcerer who actually trained Shang Tsung and Omichas. He was a part of Shang Tsung's origin story, if you will. A debate over whether to include Kali or Jade could be an issue. They both serve and protect Katana, however Kali betrays Katana, whereas Jade is always loyal in the games. We could just have the both of them, to be quite honest. While on the subject of Katana and Edenians, Rain would be a pretty decent entry into this as well. And I mean a Rain that plays closer to MK9, not MK1. That makes 17. Reptile was a very important character on the show, and his race of Zetarians, so he's a must. Reiko could make an appearance as Shao Kahn's lieutenant without actually having Shao Kahn in the game, or maybe so, come back to that as well. And for the sake of adding historical characters that make sense, I'd also add Fujin and Nightwolf. Again, Nightwolf could be an ancestor of sorts. That makes 21. Now, the bigger issue. Characters that are loosely tied to fan favorites from the game. Now more than ever, I just feel compelled to add Scorpion. Next to Shao Kahn and Shang Tsung, I think Scorpion might have caught the most bodies on Mortal Kombat Conquest. And I think there would be riots if Scorpion wasn't included in a Mortal Kombat game after MK3. The problem here is that he shouldn't be Hanzo Hasashi. Like Sub-Zero, Scorpion would have to be an ancestor of Hanzo that appears in the game. And we can't just make him Takeda like on the show. That's kind of the name used for another character at this point. But he has to be there. The other character I gave thought to was Mika, played by Jamie Presley in the show. She was one of the demons that served Quan Chi. I don't think all three of them would be needed as much, but to be quite honest, I don't think I would include Mika either. Sort of a hard choice to make, but the reason is because there's already a neglected demon of Quan Chi that rarely appears in any of the games that would be perfect here, and that's Serena. Serena's barely ever been playable in Mortal Kombat, so this would be as good a time as any to stick her in here. The fact that they brought her back in MK1 and only made her a cameo still bothers me to an extent, especially with the awesome redesign of her regular attire and the demon skin. But anyways, we now have to get to a much larger issue. Johnny Cage. The idea of having a Mortal Kombat game without Johnny Cage at this point is almost unacceptable. But what if I told you there may be a possible workaround? There's an episode in Mortal Kombat Conquest that introduced Reptile as a character. It also introduced a random Earthrealm warrior that approaches Kung Lao to fight by his side in Mortal Kombat. This man's name was Tomas. He was a ladies' man, he was extremely confident in his abilities as a fighter, and I mean extremely confident, and he was somehow known by both Raiden and Shao Kahn by name alone. The most important thing that sticks out to me is, while he didn't look exactly like Lyndon Ashby from the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie per se, his character was made to loosely look like Lyndon's portrayal of Johnny Cage in that movie. So my mind says this: make Tomas Johnny Cage's ancestor and make him play like him and be the source of Johnny Cage's energy abilities and fighting style later on. We know that Johnny has powers, but it's never fully been explained, or explored rather, how he got them. We just know that he's a descendant from warrior tribes and nothing else. Now, all this being said, I'm not really a big fan of this game introducing brand new characters that have never existed in Mortal Kombat, but I feel like that would kind of be important to do for Sonya. If we're gonna make one exception, I feel like Sonya should be it. There needs to be some type of like ancestral replacement for the original 7 if they're not already included in the game from the 1992 Mortal Kombat. Jola could essentially be Kano's replacement, but I feel like Sonya needs one of her own, and one doesn't already exist on the show, so she would have to be a lone original character, or he, because it doesn't have to be a female. This also rounds out the roster at exactly 25. Being honest, I guess it wouldn't hurt to add Shao Kahn, though he would obviously be replacing Goro as the final boss unless he was a hidden character. That would be 26 characters without DLC. So a roster for such a daunting game would take some thought, but again, it's not impossible. Also, there are 11 female characters that make perfect sense to be in the game to me without gender swapping anyone. And it's still more at its base than MK1's roster with DLC included. The inclusion of only 4 male ninjas wouldn't be too bad considering the timeline here. And again, 4 ninjas at the base of the game is still more than the base roster of MK11 at launch. So I don't think I'm pretty far off here. Which again, as long as we have Scorpion and Sub-Zero at the minimum, we're good. Now narratively the game's story would be somewhat simple, but it would also have to be strikingly different from every other MK game of the past. Like MK9, we pretty much have a good idea of the gist of the story because historical context here. We could start at Kung Lao's journey to winning Mortal Kombat, or what I would personally do, like the show, we could start at the tournament of Kung Lao's victory. The details of what happens next is where the real mystery is. One intriguing aspect of the story is that Katana shouldn't yet be outwardly skeptical of Shao Kahn. Not that she shouldn't be, it just shouldn't be readily known that she shouldn't trust Outworld. However, I don't think she should entirely be buddy-buddy with Earthrealmers just yet. A level of mystery on Katana that we haven't really seen would be interesting. Also, a period of time where Sub-Zero wasn't a complete dick would be a nice turn of form from the Mortal Kombat games of the current times as well. The thing that I think could make this game one of a kind in terms of the modern NetherRealm era of games is this shouldn't have a happy ending. With MK9, we kinda knew that the game was gonna follow Mortal Kombat's 1, 2, and 3. And while a lot of people were killed off in Mortal Kombat 9, the game still had a somewhat optimistic looking ending. The heroes were trying to rebuild Earthrealm after the destruction of what Shao Kahn had caused, and he was defeated. Here, we know the ending, and it's not a happy one. Kung Lao needs to die. To make this even crazier, I would personally have you play as Goro in the final battle of story mode. Not giving you a choice like in MK11, no, you're actually gonna play on the side of evil this time. You will fight for Outworld and you will kill the Great Kung Lao, as he's supposed to be for the story's sake. This might mean that Zero and Taja needs to die as well, unless you would actually make the risk of having a direct sequel within the same time period, which I would not do. This game needs to serve to show Earthrealm's fall and Outworld's victory, which is something we don't get often in Mortal Kombat. There should be no happy endings here at all. Once again, for that reason, I feel like a game of this magnitude just has to be one and done. Now that I think about it, the idea of you playing the final chapter of story mode as Prince Goro is even better. And then, guess what? Officially from there, you can figure out whatever the hell it is that you want to do with the story and the timeline going forward, and you can tell any story that you want to with the original characters from Mortal Kombat without having to tell the same events of the original trilogy all over again. Which is what I feel like NetherRealm has been trying to do for the longest time. Start MK back at the 1992 game, or at least the original trilogy, without being marred to that story. I think the biggest frustration for me, and this probably isn't just me, but is that since Armageddon, the team at Midway, or NetherRealm at this point, has wanted to take MK back to square one and completely reboot the franchise, and they have yet to truly do it. The reboot of MK9 acknowledged the current story of Mortal Kombat and simply went back in time. MK1 took the radical approach of taking God Liu Kang and going through a new world that he himself created. It's too extreme of a departure from what we know, while not having the guts to completely sever themselves from the MK timeline entirely. Somehow we still got Mortal Kombat 11 referenced in Mortal Kombat 1, and the end of the story is kind of a bit of a mess because of it. They clearly just want to take the characters and tell brand new original stories, but they just won't do it. I feel like starting here would be a better approach because it serves two purposes. Number one, fans get a story that we've seen before but are loosely familiar with. And number two, it gives NetherRealm the opportunity to tell any story that it wants going forward. No one ever said that Outworld has to win 9 straight tournaments after the Great Kung Lao dies. They just keep going back to this piece of the story. But those are my thoughts. How do you feel about a game that went in time to explore the life of the Great Kung Lao and how it should be handled as a fighting game, or should it even be one? Would a game like this better serve as like a Shaolin Monks type game more than anything else? Honestly, that's a whole other conversation. But in any event, like, subscribe, and hit the hype button if you haven't. And you all have a good one, and I'm out.